Yeah, we're going to be speaking about the book of Job. That is, and when trials come. You know, and prayerfully, we're going to learn how the enemy actually works in our lives, you know, in the lives of the righteous. You know, I'll presumptuously say our lives, you know. Amen. So, we're going to be taking a look at the book of Job, chapter 1. Now, Job 1:1 says, there was a man in the land of Uz. His name was Job. And that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared Elohim and eschewed evil. Now, Uz, the land in which he lived, was speaks to a land of counseling. Uz meant counseling. You know, so speaks to a land of counseling. And Job, his name means hated or persecuted. You know, so now I like to relate everything back to the center of Scripture, which is our Messiah, Yahushuah, amen. You know, and so within this, I want to show that Job is also, he's a type of Messiah. You know, he's a type of one that was hated or persecuted, amen. You know, we read in Yochanan 15:18, it says, if the world hate you, ye know that it hated me before it hated you. You know, and truly the world did hate our Messiah. And if we walk in like fashion to our Messiah, walk in righteousness, you know, if we play rude Torah, you know, fulfill the law of Elohim, you know, truly it'll hate us too. You know, and I want to make the parallel of the land of counseling being likened unto the land of Yehuda or Jerusalem. For this is where the priests were, who were supposed to teach the people, you know, the Torah of Elohim, as well as how to be clean and holy and remain that way. You know, so the land of Yehuda truly was a land of counsel. You know, and our Messiah was truly one that was hated and persecuted. So continuing on, verses 2 through 5, my first reader, please. Job 1, 2 through 5.
And there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. And his substance also was 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels and 500 yoke of oxen and 500 she behinds in a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all men in the east. And his sons went and feasted in their house, every one of his day, and sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And it was also when the day of their feasting were gone about, that Job sent and sanctified them, and rose up early in the morning, and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed Elohim in their hearts. Thus did Job continually.
Hallelujah. Thank you. So here it is. We see that Job had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He had 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels. He had 500 yoke of oxen and 500 she behinds. And a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all the men of the East. You know, and so here it is. We see 3 sets of 10 in all actuality. You know, with the kids, with the cattle. You know, we have 3 sets of 10. You know, 10 is the number that speaks to law and responsibility. You know, 30, you know, is the number of the blood of Messiah. And we see that this man was the greatest of all men of the East. You know, even as our Messiah is the greatest of all men of the East. Yes, our Messiah was the greatest of all men of the East. The East, in the Eastern mindset, you know, in that cultural mindset, the East was where the light came up. You know, it's where the sun rises. It spoke to the light. You know, and our Messiah was the greatest of the light. In fact, when he came, he said, I am the light. You know, and Yochanan bore witness to this, saying that he was the light of the world, you know, and that light was the life of men. You know, so truly our Messiah was the greatest of all the men of the East. Now, it speaks about his sons feasting in their houses, everyone in his day. You know, now, many believe this to be their birthday. You know, myself included, I didn't believe it, you know, speaking of his birthday, because of what Job says later on in this book concerning his day. You know, but here it is, whatever the case, everyone in his day, you know, this is when they would feast, you know, in their houses, everyone on his day, and they'll call for their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. So all the siblings would get together, and they would have this feast. You know, and it says, and it was so when the days of their feasting were gone about, that while they were doing this, Job would send and sanctify them. You know, he'll raise up early in the morning, and he'll offer burnt offerings according to the number of all of them. Because he was thinking maybe, you know, they have sinned or cursed Elohim in their hearts. You know, so this is what he did, you know, continually as, you know, they would gather on their days. So let me have my next reader read. Now keep that in mind because it's going to come back into play very shortly. Let's have the next reader read verses 6 through 12 of Job 1, please.
Now there was a day when the sons of Elohim came to present themselves before Yahuwah, and Satan came also among them. And Yahuwah said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered Yahuwah and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And Yahuwah said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth Elohim, and escheweth evil? And Satan answered Yahuwah and said, Doth Job fear Elohim for naught? Hast thou not made an hedge about him, and about his house, and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But put forth thine hand now, and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. And Yahuwah said unto Satan, Behold, all that he hath is in thy power. Only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of Yahuwah.
Hallelujah. Okay, so here it is. It says that Satan and the sons of Elohim, they were going to and fro in the earth and walking up and down in it. You know, if they were doing that way back when, I wonder if they're still doing that today. Think? Maybe. Just saying. All right, you know, but it says Yahuwah was kind of bragging on his boy. You know, it says in verse 8, Yahuwah said unto Hasatan, Hast thou considered my servant Job? You know, the one, has you considered the one that everybody hating on? You know, and persecuting. That there's none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth Elohim and eschew of evil. What he means, eschew of evil. You know, I don't think we can figure out what perfect or complete, you know, speaks to and upright. But what do you mean by eschew of evil? This word eschew is sur in the Hebrew, number 5493, and it means to turn off, to call back, to depart. So he's one that turns off evil. He calls back evil. He departs from evil. You know, and Satan, you know, within this dialogue, Satan is answering Yah, and he says, doeth the hated fear Elohim for naught? Hast thou not made a hedge about him? You don't have nothing to worry about. You got a hedge about him, about his house and all that he have on every side. You bless the work of his hands. His substance is increased in the land. You know, yeah, you don't have nothing to fear. What do you know? So, you know, Yah thought about it. You know, he said, well, put forth now thy hand. Put forth thine hand now and touch all that he have, and he will curse thee to his face. This is what Satan is proposing. You know, take your hands out from around him. See what you really have. See if he's really that servant that fear Elohim like you think he is. I don't think so. I think if you take your hand off of him and touch all that he have, that he'll curse you to thy face. You know, Yah thought about it a little more, you know. And Yahuwah said unto Hasatan, behold, all that he hath is in thy power. Only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So, Satan went forth from the presence of Yahuwah. And now he's about to start messing with, you know, the hated or the persecuted. Now, I'm trying to draw a parallel because I see something very similar with our Messiah, Yahushuah. You know, something very similar, you know, that happened to him. When we consider Colossians 1:16 through 18, it says, speaking of our Messiah, it says, for by him were all things created that are in heaven, that are in the earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him, and he is before all things, and by him all things consist, and he is the head of the body, the ecclesia, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he might have preeminence. Okay, now when we consider this, you know, we see that he was truly the greatest. You know, and he was the greatest man in the heavens. You know, emphasis on man, not greater than the Father, because he said Father is greater than he. Amen. You know, but we see that he was pretty great. You know, and he left from that, from being like from being, you know, the greatest unto nothing, to becoming nothing, to being stripped of everything, to becoming as one of us, as just as a man, and not even a rich man, but a poor man. You know, when asked, you know, could one follow him, he said, you know, Son of Man have not which to lay his head. You know, so he was stripped not only of all his dominion and power and authority. You know, he was stripped down. You know, and he became just as an ordinary man. You know, in the lower class at that. You know, and Yochanan 17, 1 through 5. You know, he's talking about being restored to where he was prior to this. It says, these words spake Yahushuah and lifted up his eyes to heaven and said, Father, the hour is come. Glorify thy Son, that thy Son may also may glorify thee, that thou hast given him power over the flesh, that he should give eternal life to as many as thou hast given him. And this life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true Elohim, and Yahushuah Mashiach, whom thou hast sent. I have glorified thee on the earth. I have finished the work which thou gavest me to do. And now, O Father, glorify thou me with thine own self, and with the glory which I had with thee before the world was. You know, so he was put down here to be tested, you know, as well as to pave the way for us who are also tested, to be hated and persecuted. You know, not for things that he done that was wrong, but for righteousness' sake. The hedge was taken out from around him, and he was put on earth and made subject to others when he was above all others. You know, very like unto Job. Matthew 4:1. Then was Yahushuah led up of the Ruach into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. You know, and the first time he was tempted, we see the first time that he was tempted, the enemy was not allowed to touch him. You know, when he was first tempted in the wilderness, the enemy was not allowed, you know, to touch his flesh, was not allowed to harm him. You know, but he came out of that, and then, you know, phase 2 started. And you can see in the story of Job, you know, likewise, you know, there's, you know, Satan was allowed to come at him more than once. The first time he wasn't allowed to touch him. The second time he was. So again, drawing that parallel. Let me have my next reader read Job 1:13 through 15.
And there was a day when his sons and his daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And there came a messenger unto Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them. And the Sabeans fell upon them and took them away. They have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee.
Hallelujah. Okay, so hereby we see that Job is starting to get stripped. You know, and to speak about there being a day when his sons and his daughters were eating and drinking in the eldest brother's house. So, you know, now it's time to take that stuff off the shelf that we put on in the first slide, you know, where it was speaking about everyone on their day, you know, coming together and feasting. So there was a day when they were feasting. So this is one of the birthdays, if you would, you know, that they were getting together, and they all the siblings came together and they were doing what they normally do, which was feast during that time. And it says, and there came a messenger unto Job, and the oxen were plowing in the behinds, feeding beside them. You know, and oxen speak to strong leaders, and the behinds, you know, they speak to the church in our actuality, in the ecclesia. And it says the oxen were plowing and the behinds feeding beside them, and the Sabeans fell upon them and took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped along to tell thee. You know, so here's our first glimpse at how the enemy will come at us, come at the righteous, you know, and to persecute those that are persecuted and hated. You know, this is our first glimpse at how Hasatan works. So he sent the Sabeans. Now Sabeans speaks to an oath, you know, so they're people of an oath, you know, and the people of circumcision were, it can be likened unto a people under an oath, you know. And in Acts 11:2, we see it says, and when Cephas will come up to Yahushuah, that they that were of the circumcision contended with him. You know, and so we see that these people that were up under the circumcision, that was up under the oath of Elohim, you know, and that was covenanted to him, that they were coming up against Cephas, you know, who was following our Messiah, who was hated and persecuted, and everyone who came after him likewise was hated and persecuted, right? Okay, and then we see Galatians 2:4-6. It says, and that because of false brethren unawares brought in, who came in privily to spy out our liberty which we have in Mashiach Yahushuah, that they might bring us into bondage, to whom we gave place by subjection, no, not for an hour, that the truth of the gospel might continue with you. But of these who seem to be somewhat, whatsoever they were, it maketh no matter to me. Elohim accepteth no man's person. Yeah. For they who seem to be somewhat in conference, added nothing to me. And what Apostle Paul is talking about, he's talking about some Yahudim that had came in unaware. They were false brethren. They were acting like they were with the faith. They were acting like they wanted to follow Yahushuah, but, they had ulterior motives. They were false brethren, and they were brought in unawares. This was a plot of the enemy. Can't beat them, join them. And that's what they did, and they began to infiltrate them from within. And this is what's being spoken of right here. Also, Jude 1:4, he speaks to those who came in unawares. It says, "For there are certain men crept in unawares who were of old, ordained to this condemnation, ungodly men, turning the grace of our Elohim into lasciviousness and denying the only Adonai Elohim and our Adonai Yahushuah Mashiach." So again, there were those that crept in and they infiltrated the ecclesia and was doing damage to the body of Messiah. Okay? Galatians 2:12. "For before that certain came from James, he did eat with the Gentiles, but when they were come, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing them which were of the circumcision." So we see that them that was of the circumcision was even feared by Cephas. This is Cephas that's being spoken of here, Cephas or Peter. And it's even showing how he feared them which was of the circumcision. And these are the very ones that were brought in unawares, and they began to throw their weight around and try to push their agenda. Titus 1:10 and 11, also speaks of them. Says, "For there are many unruly and vain talkers and deceivers, especially they of the circumcision, whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole houses, teaching things which they ought not for filthy lucre's sake." And you thought the prosperity gospel just began. They were here and they were doing these things even way back then. They were pushing their own agenda. Acts 23:20 and 21. "And he said, the Yahudim have agreed to desire thee, that thou wouldest bring down Paul tomorrow into the council, as they would inquire somewhat of him more perfectly. But do not yield unto them, for there lie in wait for him of them more than 40 men, which have bound themselves with an oath, that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now are they ready, looking for a promise from thee." And these are some other Yahudim who actually bound themselves with a whole separate oath, to kill the follower of Yahushuah. So we can see the Sabians at work, even in the time of Messiah, the spiritual Sabians, those who were an oath. And I think it's Deuteronomy 29 that actually speaks of the covenant of Elohim as also being an oath. Job 1:16 and 17. My next reader, please.
"While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, The fire of Elohim is fallen from heaven, and have burned up the sheep and the servants, and consumed them. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee." 17. "While he was yet speaking, there came also another, and said, The Chaldeans made out 3 bands, and fell upon the camels, and have carried them away, yea, and slain the servants with the edge of the sword. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee."
Hallelujah. Now, we see it says, while he was yet speaking, there came also another. The fire of Elohim is fallen from heaven and have burnt up the sheep and the servants. Burnt them up, burnt up the sheep. Now, who represents the sheep? Even the believers, right? Our Messiah, he's the shepherd, the good shepherd, and we're the sheep, amen? And so here it is, spiritually speaking, speaking of the fire of Elohim falling from heaven and burning up the sheep and the servants. The sheep were the servants. Spiritually speaking, the sheep are the servants. Now, this also happened during the time of our Messiah, and since then, you know, it's still happening for those who truly walk in his ways. You know, Zechariah 13:9 prophesied of it coming to be. It says, and I will bring the third part through the fire, and will refine them as silver is refined, and will try them as gold is tried. Well, how is silver refined and gold tried? They're even put in the fire, amen? You know, they shall call on my name, and I will hear them. I will say, it is my people, and they shall say, Yahushuah is my Elohim. You know, then we have 1 Kepha also speaks to this fiery trial, if you would. 1 Kepha 4:12. Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened unto you. And then also we have Psalm 66, verse 10, which also speaks to it. For thou, O Elohim, hast proved us, thou hast tried us as silver is tried. You know, so this is the way Yah works with his people, you know. And those of us who are hated and persecuted, who go through this persecution, you know, as a trial to see, you know, how much we fear Elohim and how just we are, you know. And Job's sake seem to prove to Hasatan, you know, that we are exactly as he called us to be, upright and just, you know. So he allows him to have at us, to try us, and you know, and this is the fiery trial in which we go through, just like Job went through, our Messiah went through, and those of us who follow after him, pick up our torture stakes and follow him, we too go through, you know. And at the end of the day, we'll be able to say, as Psalm 66:10, for thou, O Elohim, hast proved us, thou hast tried us as silver is tried. You know, we'll be able to say likewise. Now, verse 17 spoke about, so that's the another way. That's another way that Hasatan will work in our lives. You know, he will bring persecution upon us. You know, persecution upon the sheep, upon those of us that try to follow Yahushuah. He will bring persecution, fiery trials upon us to try to deter us from following our Messiah. We're not going to let a little fire get in our way, are we? You know, we're going to keep on following our Messiah through the fire and fiery trials, you know, all the way to eternal life. Amen? You know, but this is another way that the enemy will come at us. And verse 17 speaks of yet another way. It says, while he was yet speaking, there came also another. The Chaldeans made out 3 bands and fell upon the camels. You know, now the camels, you know, speak to the burden bearers, you know, and you know, this is speak to those that are in ministry, those who are attached to Elohim, you know, kind of like the Levites were. Okay, now Chaldeans means speaks to cloud breakers, you know, speak to the cloud breakers. So now, but something important to understand about the Chaldeans is that they were the learned class. They were the learned class of people during their time, and they primarily operated in one of 3 capacities, either as priests, astrologers, or astronomers. You know, and they were oftentimes referred to as wise men. You know, and what I propose to you today is that these 3 capacities in which they were noted for during their time in ancient times speak to those parallels, those 3 bands, you know, that they were made out of. It says the Chaldeans made out 3 bands, you know, priests, astrologers, and astronomers. You know, and this is another way that the enemy comes at us. You know, he used even the priest, as we see in the case of our Messiah, he used the priest to crucify him. You know, but also he'll use the astrologers and the astronomers. That he will use the so-called wise men of the world. You know, see, man, you know, they enter into what they call science, and this was the science of ancient times. You know, they enter into their sciences, and you know, they come up with what they perceive as truth. You know, and sometimes what they perceive as truth contradicts what Yah says is truth. And so, because they're the ruling class and the learned class of people within our time, we tend to want to believe what they say, over the word of Elohim. And this is just yet another way that the enemy draws us away from Elohim and draws us into iniquity. And just to give you an example, a very obvious example, we have the creation, the story of creation. The astrologers and astronomers says that it happened by a big bang, and everything evolved from that big bang, and that, we came from animals and, and so on and so forth. This the theory of evolution, where Yah says, no, he created the heavens and the earth in the beginning, and he said he created the animals and he created man. He didn't say anything about them evolving, and so we get to choose. Are we going to believe, the scientists of the day, the astrologers and astronomers, or are we going to believe Yah? And yeah, I'm rolling with Yah. So just as an example of how the enemy come at you though, how he come at you with the so-called wise men of the world. Let me have my next reader read Job 1:18 and 19.
While he was yet speaking, there came also another, and said, Thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness, and smote the four corners of the house. And it fell upon the young men, and they are dead. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee.
Hallelujah, thank you. One of the things that make you wonder is seeing that all his cattle had kind of got taken in one capacity or another. Was he able to do his offerings for his children as he normally would? And it just made me wonder, because it presented all that happening before this part was told. So maybe he didn't get a chance to put his covering over him, cover him with his prayer. And lo and behold, the one time he didn't, this is what happened. Just suppositions on my part, but So we see here yet another way that the enemy will come at us. It says in verse 19, and behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness. This word wind is actually ruach. It can speak to a spirit, So it could also speak to a great spirit from the wilderness, that smote the four corners of the house and it fell upon his family. And we know that this is yet another way that the enemy will come at us, is with unclean spirits. And he did likewise with our Messiah. In Matthew 16:23, we read, it says, but he turned and said unto Cephas, get thee behind me, Satan, for thou art an offense unto me, for thou savorest not the things that be of Elohim, but those that be of men. And it's kind of rough, being spiritual beings in a fleshly world. Because everyone look at you like, hey, you're supposed to be doing what men are doing, what other men are doing, but we have to do what the Ruach says do. But this wasn't the first time that the enemy was at work. This wasn't the first time. Also, we see Luke 22:3. It says, then entered Satan into Judah, surnamed Iscariot, being of the number of 12. So we see how Satan messing with those closest to him. This was his boys. This is the ones he lived with. They were like his like his sons and daughters. Well, sons, and yeah, and the women that was with him, like daughters. But, you know, they were right there. You know, and Luke 22:31, the Adonai says, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan have desired to have you that he may sift you as wheat. You know, so see, the enemy will send his spirits, you know, unclean spirits at us, and if we're unclean, you know, then, you know, they can have their way with us. You know, so I want you to understand that this world is not Yah's. You know, he's not the one ruling over this world at this time. He's ruling over us, those of us who will allow him to. Amen. You know, that was what the gospel was all about, the kingdom of heaven, you know, coming to the world. And for those of us who accept it, he's ruling over us. You know, but there is a God of this world. You know, 2 Corinthians 4:4 speak to us that in whom the God of this world have blinded the minds of them which believe not. Lest the light of the glorious gospel of Mashiach, who is the image of Elohim, should shine unto them. You know, so we have to understand that there's a God of this world. He's concerned with what? This world. You know, and the things of this world. So we have to understand that he will use these things against us. You know, he has primarily 3 ways he come at us. You know, and it's the same as he began to do from the very start with Eve. In Genesis 3:6, we can learn those 3 ways. It says, and when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, lust of the flesh, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, lust of the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, pride of life, she took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. You know, this is the way, these are the things that he utilizes, you know, that he uses his spirits to entice us with. The lust of our eyes, the lust of our flesh, and our pride of life. You know, and he sent his unclean spirits to influence us with these things. You know, even as we've seen him do with our Messiah, amen, in the wilderness. Also, 1 Yochanan 2:15 and 16, it says, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. See, because the things of the world is not of the Father. Verse 16 goes on to say, for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. See, these are the things that the world is made up of. These are the things that the God of this world has made the world up of. Even the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. You know, and 1 Yochanan 2:16 says, for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. So these things are not of our Elohim, but it is of the world and the God of this world. And these are the things in which he will utilize us to entice us away from the word way and purposes of Elohim for our lives. You know, so we need to understand that. You know, verses 20 through 22, Job 1:20 through 22, and it says, then Job arose, rent his mantle, shaved his head, and fell down upon the ground and worshipped. This is what we want to do when we're persecuted. When they're hating on us, when they're persecuting us, when we're going through those fiery trials, we don't want to curse Elohim. We want to fall down upon the ground and worship our El. And he said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. Yahuwah gave, and Yahuwah hath taken away. Blessed be the name of Yahuwah. In all this, Job sinned not, nor charged Elohim foolishly. That's our example, even as our Messiah did. That's all I have for you today. Pray it was a blessing.